Hi there. I'm Claudia Hosky from FedInsider. And on behalf of the George Washington University College of Professional Studies and Maximus, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on mission-centered design for real-world outcomes. Please type your questions and comments into the Q&A pod. If we don't get to them during today's webinar, we'll share them with our speakers so they can follow up with you. Also, take note of the Resources tab on the left side of your screen to download today's slides. We offer live captioning for all of our webinars. To follow along with us, use the hyperlink under the Live Captioning or Cart tab located above the slides. We'll have the full transcript available for download in the next day or two. And to earn training credit for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all survey questions and stay online for the duration of today's hour-long conversation. And now, let me turn over the reins to our moderator, Bill Pratt from FedInsider. Take it away, Bill.
Thank you, Claudia. Hi, everybody. My name is Bill. I'll be your moderator today. I'm so excited to be here. I want to introduce our guests and we'll tell you who they are, and then we'll take a couple moments for them to talk about themselves and tell us what they're doing. But Carter Farmer is the CIO for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Glad to have him here. He's down in D.C., ready to go. And Edwin Bodenseek is the Senior Director and CX Accelerator at Maximus. So Carter, take a couple moments and say hello.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank everyone for joining today, and a special thanks to FedInsider for putting this webinar together. Really appreciate it. So a little bit about me. My name is Carter Farmer, obviously, as Bill said. I'm currently the CIO of the EPA. Spent about 20 years of my life working in IT. I've worked in IT solutions and software companies and organizations such as Amtrak and USIP. I've led initiatives ranging from IT security and AI automation to large-scale modernization and overhauls of IT service delivery. So I have a little bit of breadth both in public and private sector, and looking forward to today's conversation.
Awesome, thank you. And Ed, hello.
Hello, Bill. I want to echo what Carter just said. Thanks to FedInsider for having us. As you just heard, Ed Bodenseek with Maximus, work in CX. I've been in technology for about a decade now and worked in customer experience for about 20 years now, both on the commercial side and in government. Spent some time as a Fed at Treasury, did some work with state, and worked in the entrepreneurial side in technology with FedEx, Air Force, did a lot of work with commercial and government. So great to be with you, and I think it's going to be a great discussion based on our prep call last week.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Today, folks, we're going to talk about how to align automation, data management, and trust building strategies to deliver services that are both effective and aligned with the public needs. We're also going to explore how mission-focused system-wide alignment can help bridge the gap between policy intent and real-world impact. So let's jump into it. I'm going to go right to Carter to get started. But let's ask the question from your day-to-day. What's it actually look like to apply design thinking at a government agency beyond the buzzwords?
Well, I like to kind of start with a word of caution here when it comes to design thinking. I think people often begin the design phase with the end state in mind. For example, they'll start by saying, let's build X to solve Y. It's a very tempting place to start because that's the shiny object. Everyone wants to see that. Everybody gets excited about that. But, that way of thinking kind of leads to failure many times, scope creep, long and costly IT projects, and total cost of ownership. And I think we got to fight that urge. We need to start by looking at the process, the data, and defining really tight requirements. I think buzzwords are one of those things that get hyped up in IT, and it kind of leads us in the wrong direction a lot of times. We got to actually look at the pieces of the puzzle that actually help build the system we're trying to accomplish. And that's always going to start with data. And now you might hear me say this a lot today, but data is the backbone of what we do when we build systems. And if you aren't starting with the process, the data, and the requirements, then you're literally looking at the project almost backwards. The more time you spend up front defining those things, the less time you'll spend in the actual building of your actual solution. So I think if people can wrap their head around that, they'll get really far in the actual design thinking process.
Awesome. Ed, anything to add to that?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it comes down to systems thinking, really, and just moving. And we've talked, Carter mentioned these buzzwords. That's so true. Like moving away from this isolated idea of just service improvements here and there, but just like thinking about this system wide, intelligence driven systems across the board, like aligning this to mission that modernization alone, just it's not enough. That time has shown even the most advanced technologies, they're going to fail to drive this value if it's not aligned to mission outcomes. I think we're going to be getting into some of that today. It's going to be a good discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And so Carter, can you walk us through a real example where this approach shifted outcomes or improved mission delivery in your recent experience?
Absolutely. So we have for years, in EPA's Office of Water saw the need to better integrate data across the entire water program. And it's a very large program at EPA. And we didn't start that by integrating the integration by designing IT solutions or even thinking of what an IT solution would look like. Yeah, rather, we started by defining a conceptual model about how the relevant Clean Water Act programs fit together. That included thinking through what the connection points were between those programs, where were the handoffs, and what were the shared responsibilities. And the team took this concept and modeled it after a child stacking toy, which is funny, but very effective at communicating the vision of integrated information, right? So, it's a simplicity of our design that actually gives you the ability to build complex things. And that conceptual model led to data models, process workflows, data standards, common terminologies, and even programmatic outcome metrics. And those were all based on that model and vision. And that system, that whole process led to really a redesign of many different systems that eliminated paper processes, integrated data, and clearly communicated to the public the end goal. So if you all have some time, I encourage and implore you to Google "How's My Waterway," which will get you to the site of that end result we built, and it'll give you a demonstration of what's possible through data integration.
That's fantastic. Ed, any thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at the title of today's webinar, like we're going to be talking a lot about mission and orienting all of the work we do towards the outcome that you want. And the example that you asked for, Bill, we often point to one of the greatest successes that we had deploying technology with that mission outcome in mind, where the table stakes we had to get done with one of the greatest public emergencies we all remember was with COVID-19 and the vaccine assistance program that we worked with the administration on back in 2020 with the CDC COVID-19 vaccine assistance program. And we point to that because the scale was unprecedented. We engineered the largest federal, implementation, in that example of Genesis. We supported 20,000 concurrent agents at 1 million interactions per hour. That's impressive from a technology perspective, but, despite that, we were, in that case, working side by side with government, getting it done, but we were delivering messages that was, meeting policy objectives. But when you look at it closely, the mission of that was to deliver a message, to deliver information in a way that met the end user, met the mission, make sure that we were listening to things like paying attention to the data. We're going to talk about that too, doing the sentiment analysis and doing that in a human way. And so we work side by side to not just deploy 20,000 something remote agents. Again, the table stakes getting that done, by the way, in 6 weeks, and achieving the customer satisfaction that was required, all the cost savings. That's great. But also making sure that we revise how we did it. And we're speaking to people in a human way to achieve the mission outcome. That took a lot of work. And again, we met the mission outcomes because we did it in a very, very intentional way, applying these principles of systems thinking and design thinking. So we're pretty proud of that one to enable access to vaccines, better appointment scheduling, better ride share services, better childcare support, all those things by simply starting with the human being in mind. That's important to keep in mind here, not just the technology.
That's awesome, Ed. Thanks. I'm gonna ask one more question for this segment, but then we've got a great audience question from the USDA, so we'll be getting to that in a moment. But just to wrap this up, so when agencies redesign systems around the mission, what indicators should they use to know it's working from the citizen's perspective? What sort of metrics or analytics are we capturing? Carter, sorry.
I mean, what I've found effective is you just have opportunities to watch your target audience interact with your system. See what they do, see where they get confused, listen to what questions they're asking. There's also a value add in bringing people into your team who are not experts in that space you're developing. They help you learn how to communicate with the broader audience, and then they lend a different unbiased perspective and analysis of the feedback you obtain. And when it comes to feedback from your audience, it's a human nature to want to, really focus in on the positive things you're hearing about your product. But it's also really good to recognize that up front and establish really good mechanisms that are broad enough that you mitigate this tendency, because negative feedback is what you should be looking at first. No one learns about succeeding. Failure is the true lesson, right? So the key here is to fail hard, fail fast, then learn and pivot. Design teams really have to embrace that mentality to be effective.
Awesome. Ed, I want to wrap us up for this segment, and then I've got a question from the USDA for you both.
I would agree with that. We all know the standard SLAs around that, the CSAT scores. There's also burden scores. I'd keep in mind too, in January, the Bipartisan Government Services Delivery Improvement Act just passed. So we're going to have a whole new set of metrics that are arriving, with each of the HISPs having to come up with service delivery leads, a new universal set of metrics that are coming around 7 key areas, from burden to accessibility to transparency, fairness. And then OMB is going to be stepping in as well. So there are new things to consider as the needle is going to be moving around service delivery. That's changing as we speak, and let's get unified around that and have that discussion. It's a good time to be talking about it.
Awesome, thanks. So let me go over here to the audience question from the USDA. So there are many intricate aspects with various projects for end user benefits and usability. How do you mitigate the risk of a one-size-fits-all that may compromise these? Carter, what do you think?
I kind of go back to the earlier thing I said about data and process and how those things interact, right? So, we have systems at EPA that actually literally have been built in monolithic ways, right? And that literally just tears everything apart. Once you design, try to fix one part to satisfy this stakeholder, you actually break 20 other things, right? So it kind of goes back to the beginning part of this and trying to create a system, not that pleases everyone, but pleases the most people and hits the most outcomes you can reach. And also goes back to a point of data, right? So, EPA data is our lifeblood. What we do is we collect a lot of data from states and tribes. And when we take that and act on that data, right? So the way we look at this from EPA standpoint is that we have to have open data, and we have to have data that's actually usable from whether it's JSON or XML, whatever it might be coming in as. We have to be able to ingest that data in a way that's standardized and then be able to use it on the other side. And trying to be too rigid in how we do that can actually compromise our end goals, right? So we have to be very, very loose in the beginning and be open to how we pull data in, and then really base our outcomes by standardizing that data in the process of the ETL, right? And then bringing it into the system and then letting it come out the other side. So it's usable to not just one or two user groups, but the whole, all the taxpayers as a whole, right? All the end users as a whole. So.
Got it. Great. Ed, you want to add to that question or answer?
Just the importance of tracking progress around that, just refine all that based on outcomes, just keep evolving the systems to sustain that mission success. So, typically the goalposts can be moving, and that's to be expected. So adaptability.
Sounds great. So let's talk about automation and data integration. I know that you both have a lot to say about this. We'll start with you, Ed. Where have you seen automation and data integration truly move the needle, not just as an IT upgrade, but in improving service delivery and decision making?
Yeah, a lot of examples around this. I think also one key example that comes to mind is what we've done, like with CMS, for example, with contact center operations. We've supported something like 65 million Medicare beneficiaries. That's an example. It's a massive marketplace. 24/7 virtual contact center services. In this example, you have 30 something million multi-channel inquiries over a year. And so in that example, you have automation helping quite a bit to increase customer satisfaction. This is an example where we have tools to help. There's something we use called NEVA, for example, where we can automate quite a bit of the inquiries coming in. We have something called intent analysts. So it's important, like we think about automation, that you have a human in the loop so that you're listening pretty carefully So there's something called intent analysts. So we're listening really, really carefully so that, yeah, you can automate quite a bit of these inquiries coming in and having AI routing carefully. But you also want to make sure that when you have utterances, for example, that AI doesn't, you be so careful with these things, doesn't quite understand just yet, that you still have that human in the loop and you still have these intent analysts, as we call them, listening just to make absolutely sure that they're being routed carefully. And so you can scale up really, really quickly. You can make sure that you can automate in a really smart way, but keeping that human in the loop. So we point to that example as something you can do really, really effectively at scale, but always keeping that human in the loop. So really, really proud of that example, and so much more is happening. I want to get into like what's also happening with agentic AI. I know we're planning to talk about some of that as well, and semi-autonomous kinds of things that are happening and on the horizon too. So I'll save that for what I know you want to ask about too, Bill.
Sounds great. Yeah, agentic AI is so exciting. So Carter, same question. Where have you seen automation and data integration truly move the needle? And how is it improving service delivery or decision making, and what made it work?
Well, I think Ed really hit the nail on the head there, because it's when you have these economies of scale things, situations happening, like call centers, et cetera, where you have so much volume coming in, and it becomes hard to actually keep up with that data and do it in an effective way. I think AI provides a really value add there, right? So we have some exciting things happening at EPA in a similar stream, which is, we have AI help us to categorize and summarize public comments that are part of the agency's rulemaking process. And these comments are critical to the process, but many times the volume of the comments are overwhelming. And it could be from several 100,000 to millions of comments. And that requires significant resources to summarize and categorize. And historically, we've had to use contractors to do this work, and it's taken months and months for us to complete this. And there are time frames around this rulemaking process, right? So we can't take forever just to figure this out, right? It has to be done in a timely manner. So right now we're working on a tool that can take these comments that are stored electronically in regulations.gov, ingest them into our automated process that leverages AI to categorize the comment into categories that are specific to the individual rule, and then summarize those comments. It then can deliver this information to an EPA employee who can review it, interpret the information, and it provides opportunity to significantly improve our processes, our time to actually turn this around, our efficiency, and while still remaining transparent to the public, right? Which is a very important piece of this. Having a human in the process, as Ed said, is very important, and also being transparent to the public is just as important. This can't happen in a black box. And I think when you remove that part of the equation from the actual building of the system, it gives more reliability and more transparency than people actually think is possible.
Well, that's so great. Sentiment analysis to the rescue, and that and more. So fantastic. Well, many agencies are automating for efficiency. How can they ensure that these efforts also support transparency, accountability, and public trust?
Yeah, is that to me, Bill? I think
Yes.
it's having. I think it's having being transparent about the methodologies being used. A lot of this doesn't have to be in a black box. There's been a lot of conversations in recent years about public trust. That's really, really important. There's the goalposts continue to use. The technology is evolving literally by the month sometimes. And so education is very important. The other key thing is upskilling. Maximus recently commissioned a survey just in this case, of federal IT, our IT colleagues. And upskilling came in as one of the key challenges. And so we even have our own colleagues saying that they want to continue to keep up with this. And so if that's true, and the data support it, imagine the general public and the citizenry. And so I think that's really, really important that we just pour a lot of effort into that to build trust.
That sounds great. Carter, thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think, especially on the government side of things, things are in the government, unfortunately, are done in a very manual way in many places, right? So I think people see modernization and think less transparent, right? But really what's happening is we're taking very manual systems and we're digitizing them, right? When you were doing, say, take permits, for example, those are primarily were done via paper submissions, right? Where you put something, you mail it in or you put it in a system and then you just wait and you wait and you never know where your application is in the process, and you're just kind of stuck until you get something in return, right? And now that they're digitized, that leaves us having transparency, accountability that we haven't had before. We can dashboard those things out. The public can see the status of their permit, and they can track that in real time. See where they are in the queue, how long it might take to get their answer back, right? So I think of many times people think that modernization is going to lead to less transparency, when in real world processes and kind of outcomes, you actually see more transparency and the ability to actually give you more data back than you ever had before.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen that myself at Homeland Security so many times, for hiring process and procurement. Over the years, it's been so opaque. You didn't know whose desk it was sitting on. You couldn't tell. So it's great to get these things, sort of in front of everybody in a cyber way, and then throwing a little bit of sunlight on it never hurts, right?
No, and Bill, if I could just add something else, like that's also behavioral science. Like you mentioned the use case there. Let's just talk about human capital management just for a moment. Like that's human behavior. If you throw some sunlight into where you are in a given process, let's just take recruiting, for example. If you know where you are in a given process, you're going to stick around a little bit longer, just if you know what's happening behind the scenes. So anyway, amen to what you just mentioned.
Yeah. Ask me how many people I lost because they just couldn't wait, for the new job. So anyway, but not, let's move on to happier topics. So let's finish up this segment. What questions, Carter, should government leaders be asking before greenlighting automation? I think you've covered probably quite a few of them, but anything else stick out in your mind?
Yeah, I think I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I think AI automation have become the new buzzwords, right? It's kind of like the cloud was 10 plus years ago. But a key piece of AI automation that most people don't consider up front is data and process. They're everything, right? If you don't start with a solid foundation of data, then AI automation will end up costing a great deal and bringing very little value add, right? So I think we need to start by talking about processes and data, and what processes are currently in use in the government and the private sector that were built with automation in mind. Not many, right? Many of these processes in the government and private sector were built with humans in mind. So one thing that I see a lot is people try to lift and shift their current process directly into an automation or AI, kind of workflow. And instead, what they should be doing is redefining and reimagining that process as it would apply to automation. Another key kind of piece of this too is total cost of ownership, right? And I think that's something that's kind of forgotten many times too. Like sometimes we get too excited about automation and forget there's a cost associated, right? So while there might be a value add, it might come at 2, 3, 4x the cost of performing the task manually. So finding the actual best use cases where AI can be best applied, I think is a smart thing, and understanding the trade-off between those is really an important consideration for leaders and owners of products. So.
Great, thank you. And Ed, any thoughts on what you've been advising your government clients on what they should be doing before greenlighting automation?
Yeah, I go back to the conversation the three of us had last week, and it's really just taking a step back and looking at the high-level roadmap, for the business conversation. Bringing the business into the conversation as early as possible. And I know Carter, we talked about this as well, and I know you agree. It's just the thought of how do you embed this experience, intelligence, and automation into governance, into funding, into this agency-wide decision making, as a strategy. Let's define how AI and automation and these predictive insights can shape service delivery, really moving forward. And I have a colleague, and I won't embarrass him, but he might even be listening. I don't know. He joined us recently from an agency. He jokes that there's just botulism. We have too many bots, at agencies. Which I think is really insightful. And it's like some of these things, without the broader view in mind, just can get out of hand. And so I just think that wider view, that roadmap, I think are going to prompt some really good questions. We have what we call a mission readiness assessment. And we use this as a diagnostic tool to really engender those conversations and to lead to the deeper insight side by side with our government partners, because they have the answers. We just like to ask the questions, right? To say, how do we help you? How do we help you engineer that roadmap to explore those right answers that you have in your heads, and that we can help get you there. Those are always fruitful conversations to have. So anyway, appreciate the question, Bill.
And if I could, I think Ed kind of nailed it right there. I think, many times people just hear AI and think it can solve any problem, right? And they see what it's done in other organizations, et cetera, and they just jump in there without asking the right questions first, as I just mentioned. I think that is such an important part of the process. Many times the solution or the problem you're trying to solve doesn't need AI, right? It doesn't. It could be way lower level than that and way cheaper than that. So I think the tendency to jump straight to the buzzword AI, Gen AI, whatever it might be, can actually slow the process down. And if you don't ask those questions up front, you can go down a road pretty far and not realize you've gotten that far down the road, right? You need to back up, reverse, and go back and figure out where you started and what you should have gone down first, right? What you should have led with first.
Right.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, it reminds me, I was moderating a panel like 3 months ago, and I got my hand slapped by the panelists because we were prepping. It's a funny story. I was prepping for the panel, and I had all these questions about the future and AI and where things were going. And I'll never forget, these were all a government exec, and they all said, "Listen, hold on a second. We still need to build like a foundation. Like, we need to talk about what we need to build right now." And I said, "All right, so I guess I'm future boy, right?" And it was really instructive because in that particular example, they just want to talk about the foundation. Not that we don't want to walk and chew gum at the same time and think about the future, but again, it was very educational because, to Carter's point, sometimes that's not the answer. That's okay. We need to meet our government partners where they're at. So again, flexibility is key, but that was really, really, it's important to listen.
You bet. Yeah. First rule where you're dealing with feds, please listen. Hey, and the one thing is you don't want to automate a bad process, right? There might be some reason that Gladys or Jim has been pressing that one button every time they do a form for years, may not even know why anymore. So doing that assessment of the actual end-to-end process and what should be automated, and maybe even go to AI. That's very important. That's part of the work that people, I think, they try to take the tools and find a reason for the tools instead of the other way around.
100. That is exactly what happens, Bill. You nailed it, right? And it's like many times we'll see, maybe like an HR specific situation, right? They'll say, "Hey, we need a form to collect this data to do this process," right? And then when we sit there going, "Okay, this form collects data we have 99% of already. You need one more piece of this. That's all you need. So why are we collecting this data a third time or asking the end user to enter this data into a system when we can just pull this from another system in the organization already," right? So I think many times the lift and shift mentality has to be stopped in its tracks, and people have to reimagine how they're looking at things and then look at it from a different lens.
Yeah, preach. I totally agree. So great. Hey guys, we've got a question from the audience, a real good one here. So here's the question. Any comments on shared vision modeling? The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers did a lot of this with their stakeholders. Any thoughts on that, Carter?
We haven't really gotten that far into the game yet. As Ed spoke earlier, we're more in the data-defining moment right now. We're trying to use AI, and we're trying to get down that path. But we haven't really gotten to the point where we can bridge the gap between computer and visual and natural language processing, right? So I think that's probably a future step for us, probably in the next year or so. Right now, we have a lot of tech debt that we're trying to solve, right? So really, that's where most of our efforts are going. Now, will we get there? I think so. It's just going to take time, right?
Sounds great. Any thoughts, Ed, on shared vision modeling?
We give this a lot of thought. We cannot wait. Again, all in due time. It's all changing very quickly. There is so much potential I think we need because, of the mandate, truly the needs for responsible AI. So certainly with all of that in mind, the possibilities are pretty exciting. So whether it's AI automatically adjusting, let's say, IRS tax assistant workflows based on filing season demand, as an example, or aligning, let's say, VA and DoD health records to ensure continuity of care for veterans. There's so many things we could do across like shared services, for example. And all of that is becoming a reality. And so we do give that a lot of thought as innovators, but all in due time. These are just really important conversations to have. And again, appreciate the question.
Right. Great stuff. Thanks for the folks out there. And let's go to Carter for our next segment to get started. Outcomes-based service management. So we're all moving towards the outcomes and not just tracking metrics. Theoretically, this is very nascent, right? We're starting to move there. But in your experience, what are the most effective ways agencies can define and track outcomes that matter both to leadership and taxpayers, and not just outputs or the compliance metrics we've been chasing for years?
Well, I think it first starts with being able to define what success looks like, right? And not just for the agency, but for the stakeholders, for the taxpayers, for the end user, right? In my experience, government agencies are really good at tracking outputs, yet outcomes are a little more difficult for us. So it's critical to get the measurable, provable outcomes that are transparent and derived from the data. For the sake of sounding like a broken record, I'm going to go over data a lot here in a second. Outcomes to me is all data, right? So again, you have to ask yourself, what are the data I have available to me to demonstrate an outcome? Do I have the data I need? If not, how do I get it? Once I have that data, is it being collected in a standard way? Does it allow me to automate the process of moving data into outcomes? And do I need to create abstractions to help me get to define an outcome, right? Lastly, I think the most critical part of this whole situation, especially when using AI and a lot of advanced technology, is you need to document and be open about how the data was used to define an outcome. And it's got to be repeatable. Someone's got to be able to take that data, follow your methodology, and come to the same conclusion. I think that's very important. That gets back to the transparency conversation we had earlier. But at the end of the day, to me, I don't come from a data background, but the world is becoming more data driven as the time moves on, as the clock moves second to second, and it's not going to slow down. So AI is driven on data, and our processes and our outputs have to be driven on the data we have available. And if we can define the data up front of what we need, then the actual outcomes can be more driven toward what the actual end user needs, and it's actually valuable to them.
That's awesome. Ed, any thoughts on that topic? It's a great one, I think. Thank you.
I agree. And we talked about this last week a little bit too. The AI is enabling us to become so much more skilled at predicting the outcomes that companies, and we're not the only ones, but we certainly consider ourselves like leading in this. We're not the only ones, that we are able to become so much more confident in predicting the outcomes that we can share risks with our government partners. So for example, now we can look at contracts and say, okay, let's share some of the risk and put that into contracts. So because AI is going to allow us to predict the outcomes with the data, that we could say with confidence, we will achieve this bundle of what we call, like a bundle of KOIs, what we call them. So like, key outcome indicators, right? So that could be a mix of SLAs that we all know, but it could be other key outcomes, whatever those things might be, as defined, a continuous feedback loop we want to put in place, or improved efficiency or effectiveness, or whatever predictive things we want to put in that bundle. And we will hit those things and put in place incentives or disincentives. That's pretty exciting, because I think it's a win-win for everybody. So again, like the technology itself, that also is changing. So it's important to pay attention, because these are very, very positive things that are happening, I think, for taxpayers, for the government, and certainly for industry. Another great question.
Well, awesome stuff. And when you mention risk, that is one of the pain points forever and ever. PMs out there in the government trying to, someone comes up and says, hey, you need a risk register, and they're like, okay, now you're sitting down out of, what might my risks be, right? I think a way to automate some of that, and through the outcomes based way of doing business might be really helpful in that regard, because folks just, in my experience, just aren't staffed enough to really sit around and do that stuff well. And hopefully risk management, as far as program management, might be something that could be supported, of course, for the overall engineering aspect of it. I don't know. Carter, any thoughts on that? Have you guys struggled with your risk registers, or trying to determine risk or validate that your risk has been mitigated on the programs you work on?
Yeah, I think that it's a big question mark, I think, for a lot of agencies on how to approach that in an effective way, right? So risk, I think, is always evolving and always changing, especially in a very fast moving environment. And I think really what you have to do is really get back to that kind of agile development mentality, right? So from my perspective, if you sit there in a stagnant development standard, like a waterfall method or something of that nature, you really increase your risk tenfold, right? If you can keep iterating on a problem, and then if you need to pivot, you can change, and if you need to move around, you can do that. I think that's very important in how you actually deliver on something and actually mitigate your risk. I don't think you'll ever mitigate anything 100%, and I don't think PMs will ever be 100% confident that they've covered every risk possible. I think another thing we've been using, actually, which is interesting, we actually released a chat GPT wrapper at EPA, right? So it's all built inside our Azure Gov Cloud. And we've been throwing project plans into the chat clients, right? And JI look at it and analyze it and give us back feedback, which has been hugely beneficial, because it'll see things that we aren't even looking at, we aren't thinking of, right? And there's way to use these tools to actually better inform us to make better decisions and drive outcomes of our projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Crowdsource that problem.
Got to, right?
A lot of people have thought about this around the world, and we've trained on it. Ed, any thoughts on that?
I don't have a risk management background, so I can't speak to this one with authority. I can say you can mitigate risk. Clearly, you can intuit. You can mitigate risk with data, and you can see from an outcomes perspective, you can track, right? We know this, whether you're reducing agent-assisted volume, measurable cost savings, that's going to reduce lots and lots of risk. So that we know is true, and we're going to be promoting quite a bit. So a lot to be seen here.
That's great. Thanks, Ed. I'm going to stick with you in this. We've talked about this a little bit just a moment ago, but I want to add one flavor to it with regard to legacy programs. How do you recommend agencies structure services or service around outcomes, especially when legacy programs weren't built with that model in mind? We mentioned waterfall and agile a moment ago. It's something that's taken a large part of my adult career, and so. But we're not there yet, and there's some agencies who aren't even really doing agile yet. So when legacy programs were the way we were building it, and waterfall was the way we were building it, how do you kind of transition? Any thoughts about transitioning to outcome-based KOIs based with these legacy systems we have to work with?
Way to adapt, Bill. You're already using the language. Yeah, that's great. KOI. No, I think it's a culture shift right off the bat, from a culture shift from a reactive to a proactive service delivery mindset. It really does, I think, start with that. I liken culture to an operating system. You have to give it patches, you have to give it upgrades, you have to really treat it like an OS. I think that's often overlooked. And so if you pay attention to it that way, I think you can achieve some pretty remarkable things. We talked last time about, the strangler methodology, as one way to retire some of that debt. I think too that there's some power in the idea of relentless incrementalism to start to kind of chip away at some of this. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, I think, to look at that mountaintop, like how are we going to get there? But that's one way to approach it. I think it feels like, I hope I'm not overstating it, kind of a historic moment. There's a lot of appetite for change, and that really does not feel like an understatement right now. To just hit that reset button in so many ways, and not just in technology. And so if there's ever a time to do it, it feels like this is it. To retire a lot of that debt, and to look at a lot of these legacy systems. And so, Yeah, I just would encourage us to all to lean in to do that. Carter's in the thick of it, so I'd be curious to his answer on this one, because I'm pretty sure he's got, I don't know, probably can't count on one hand how many times he's doing this right now.
I think my life is mostly legacy systems right now. So that's my modernization projects are kind of what we're totally focused on right now, the tech debt, et cetera. And I couldn't agree more with you, Ed, on this. It's I think what we find, I've found this in private and public sector, right? It starts with taking a deep breath and conscious being able to step away from the legacy system and saying, okay, there's baggage here, there's emotional attachments here, and we have to recognize new approaches. And maybe that's just leaving the whole entire legacy system behind, right? Maybe it's built in too monolithic of a way, and we can't actually use that model anymore. We have to abandon it, right? And that's okay, right? But that change process requires strong leadership, right? Because most of the time it's as much about managing and kind of working through people as it is technology, because people get used to using a system, get used to doing things a certain way. And when you reimagine a legacy system, it can really change the paradigm on how it's actually being used in the organization. And that's hard for people, right? That's hard. And it might take them a little while to accept that change and move forward and realize it is an improvement, but you will have people that are early adopters, and just like you have people you'll be dragging, kicking, and screaming into the process, right? And that's difficult. And I think you have to challenge all your assumptions, and you have to figure out what the programmatic drivers of the system are, right? And then, lastly, you gotta, this whole thing should probably be called data, because this is what we're going back to data one more time. Data-driven design is critical in achieving those outcome-based model, right? So you have to understand what the data are, then ask, how does this data move through the process? And notice neither Ed nor I talked a single bit about building an application, about system functionality, nothing like that, right? Once you do all those things that we just spoke about, the design should manifest itself pretty clearly. You need to actually start at the grassroots and build from there, work with the people, work with the technology, and figure out your data, and then build from there. Legacy systems can be baggage that can be just dragged on and on and on, because sometimes it just seems like too tall or steep of a mountain to climb. And those are really the times where you need to tackle it first and foremost. You can't hide from that. It's only going to get worse, and you have to address it as fast as you can.
It makes so much sense. And I think that, the modern way of doing the modern capabilities now with agentic AI and vibe coding, I think might give us a path forward that's going to give us a shortcut, because theoretically, at least in practice, we don't have to really figure out how to convert that old mainframe that did all that COBOL in the way it did it back in 65 or whenever they built it. I guess it wasn't quite that far back, but now we can, using these modern techniques, we can say, hey, here's basically what we're trying to get out of this system. Is there a faster way to just go build this thing and, gosh, have the agents knock it out for us in a couple of weeks? That's, I think very exciting, and really nascent, for at least for the government doing that. But I don't think it's going to be a year before there's going to be armies of agentic AI developers by the big integrators tackling some of this stuff, and that's, I think, going to be a sea change. Ed, you had a thought?
A couple of things. Well, I think to the earlier comment, it speaks to why there's such an appetite for commercially ready, off-the-shelf solutions as well, right? And I think why you don't hear, the other word you're not hearing us use is customizing things, but rather just configuring. I think that goes without saying. To what you just raised, Bill, too, because now you're raising the issue of agentic AI. I was at a conference a couple months ago, early, like the winter now, I guess, and I thought I saw a glimpse of the future, and I would love to get Carter's take on this too. I don't think I mentioned it last time we spoke, but I thought I saw a glimpse of the future, and there was a Finnish company talking about how they gave their agent a personality and a name. They talked about how they automated a number of tasks, and they put the agentic AI on their org chart, and they talked about how the supervisors now are trained, who knew the programming language of the future would be English, and the supervisors now are trained in managing humans and agentic AI. That's like the new skill set. And and so they're going to be what they decided to do was to train their agents to do one core job, not to do many things, just do one thing really well, and they're going to create a whole family, so to speak. And I just remember sitting there thinking, like that's absolutely amazing, like on the org chart, And so how that applies to government, that was a commercial company, so that's a bit different, but really, really, really thought provoking.
I mean, that sounds kind of like the hive mind kind of coming together in AI, right?
Little sci-fi, I know.
Yeah, a little sci-fi, right? But
Right.
I think it's exciting, right? So, I do think agentic AI and especially in the development space, I think we're maybe a year out, Ed. I think Bill. I think we're pretty close. I've seen some technology I've seen on the market that's coming from different organizations where you're just giving a really good set of problem set of definitions of requirements and let it go, and it can build a system overnight, right? It's pretty impressive, and I don't think we're far off from the days from someone sitting on their couch and building a brand new enterprise system in a matter of days instead of a matter of having a team of 30 and tons of contractors and people looking at the system 20 different ways, project managers iterating over months and years, trying to build a really detailed enterprise system, to people building these systems overnight in their basements, right? It's not far off. And I think Ed's point about the hive mind kind of mentality is once you build those kind of specialized pieces in the organization, then the next step is really having them work together, right? And once they can start working together, the level of efficiency you can probably provide to the organization is going to be exponential.
It is amazing. You assign each one a role, and there's a product owner, there's a developer, there's a tester, there's an EA analyst. It's pretty amazing. Here we come. The future's coming. We do have a question from Maximus Federal, of all things. Does reimagining a legacy system into a modernized state lessen the criticality of retiring technical debt? So we've been playing right around that area, but Ed, you want to start with that, and we'll go to Carter after?
Give me the question again, please.
So it was, does reimagining legacy systems into a modernized state lessen the criticality of retiring technical debt? I think, well, I have my thoughts in the positive, but please.
I don't think it lessens the criticality of it at all. No, I'm just curious to your thoughts there, but no, I mean, I think no. My answer is no.
That's where I was going, where it doesn't lessen the criticality, but you can now close it using the modern technique. That's what I was thinking.
Or even accelerate it. Yeah.
And I can say that one again if you care to hear it again. Basically, using legacy systems and modernizing them, does that lessen the criticality of retiring technical debt? I think we've said, probably not, but I think you can do it a lot faster. Any thoughts, sir?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also think, the criticality doesn't change, right? But I think when you modernize a system and you reimagine how that system should be built anew, I think it can actually break apart some of the actual risk and debt that is involved, right? So, we have a system here at EPA that has been kind of turned into a Frankenstein monster, right? It was a legacy system that's been built in a monolithic manner, and instead of actually fixing the actual system, they just keep bolting on things to the side of it, right? And that actually just creates enormous amounts of additional technical debt, right? And over time, you change one thing over here, and it breaks half the other part of the system, right? And during our kind of initial stages of trying to figure out how to modernize that thing, we sat down with the team, and it wasn't just the development team; it was the entire IT shop, right? Operations, architecture, you name it, right? So we sat down and started talking about, okay, what's the data we needed for this system? What's the problem we're trying to solve? How does the system work? What are the outcomes? And within 45 minutes of discussion, we realized that we were already collecting 80-90% of the data through other systems in the EPA, right? And it's like, okay, well, why are we building another system to perform the same task we're already doing in a monolithic way? So we actually broke the system down into the systems that already existed, and then we solved for the remaining 10 and 20%. And that really reduced our technical debt. It didn't make it any less critical, but it reduced our technical debt greatly. And it also built resiliency into our systems, right? So we aren't sitting there stuck on one system where we change one thing or a requirement changes down the road and we're stuck. We can now, we're a lot more agile in our ability to actually modernize or change or move forward or actually modify the system in a way that actually is going to work for our new requirement as they come in.
That's so awesome. Well, before we get to our last segment, we have some interesting survey results. I want to share these. So we were talking about AI. The question that FedInsider asked the listeners is, how do you feel about using AI in your organization's processes and services? So 32% very positive, excited by the possibilities, 45% somewhat positive, interested but cautious, 13% neutral or undecided, 8% somewhat concerned, wary of risk, 2% very concerned, and skeptical of benefits. So I think, the sea change has occurred, right? And the vast majority of folks see this positively, and now it's just a matter of making it happen. Any thoughts on that poll before we go to our final thought?
Oh, clearly, it's not going on the org chart anytime soon.
Funny you mentioned that. So believe it or not, now this is 5 years dated now. It was the early baby steps into AI. So RPA bots, NASA down in Houston actually put 2 RPA bots on their org chart. And they had those robotic process automation tools do certain things for the agency. And, everybody was rushing toward, and it's still great. And it still has applications, as we transition the bridge from the past to the future. But AI kind of sucked a lot of air out of the room, rightfully so. But interestingly, NASA was doing the org chart thing 5 years ago. So kudos to them. But let's wrap up here. So case studies and playbook value. Carter, if an agency leader is listening today, what's a success story they should look at as a model? And what should they be asking vendors or internal teams to ensure similar success? Is there anything you can point to? I think you just shared a little bit about what.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think the example I just used is a primary one, right? I think, we always look at problems as in a siloed way, saying, okay, how do we solve this problem, when we actually need to look at it from an organizational wide perspective, right? I think many times we probably already solved part of that problem in the organization somewhere, and we need to just basically take that and see if we can reuse it in some way or use parts of it to solve a new problem, right? There's no reason to reinvent the wheel when you already have half the problem solved. And I'll just reiterate that the questions leaders should be asking are, who are the people, what is the process, what are the data, and what problem are we trying to solve, and how do these things interact? And if you can answer or solve all those things, then you're going to be much closer to the success, and you're going to be able to actually not just be closer to success, but you'll be able to actually take that and apply it again and again and again in a way that's going to be effective for your organization.
That's fantastic. Ed, your same question. What's a success story you or some of your clients you could point to that kind of let other leaders point to what they want to get their teams to do?
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to what you want to be looking for as well. I mean, one of the things we point to are the many success stories behind something we call total experience management. And it's the idea that as you look across the market landscape, and our government partners have many options, and that's a good thing. It's a healthy market, right? Look to the success stories as something that's flexible. Look for something where you've got curated technology. We point to something that is modular, that offers that flexibility. Again, we call it total experience management, and we call it that because it puts together this idea of the people, the process, and the technology, and this next gen customer experience idea that just these building blocks, so you're positioned for the future. So that's the key thing that you would look for. So be very, very intentional about that. So that you think about scalability and modularity. So you're positioned, it's a buzzword, but it's an important one. That is, you want to be future proofed.
Awesome. Guys, you've been so amazing. Ed Bodensink and Carter Farmer. I think we have time for like 1 minute each, like any final thoughts that maybe we didn't talk today. Ed, let me start with you and then we'll go to Farmer. Or Carter.
Start with me? Go ahead.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Just thank you so much to FedInsider. Bill, you're a great host, and Carter, it's an honor to share the stage, as it were, with you. No, it's a great topic. I'm glad that there's so much discussion around mission. That's really encouraging. We stuck to that. And also, the year started, with so much discussion around efficiency, and we're encouraged by that. We also think it's just a starting point. And so when we talk about this idea of just like next generation customer experience, start with efficiency. That's good because you want to right away go to eliminate this friction like in service delivery, but then build on that. Don't just settle for efficiency, right? That's a good thing to achieve for. Definitely cost savings, 100%. But build on efficiency and look to things like, go from that foundation to something that is optimized. Go for effectiveness, and then finally look to the future and something that's insights driven, adaptable, and transformational. Not just buzzwords. Those are real things we can do with the technology and the process that's in place. And so, look for partners that think intentionally about these things. Again, we're not the only ones. You have options, but it's exciting that there are people in the industry that want to partner with you and help government that want to do some good work. So again, thank you for the time. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you. Carter Farmer of the EPA, thank you for your service, sir. And your final thoughts before we wrap.
I couldn't agree with Ed more on that last point he was just making. And, I think one thing that leaders need to think about in mission-centered design is, a lot of times the hardest part of change is driving change in the people and the culture of the organization, right? So I think it's important to start looking at those low-hanging fruit items to build and design against that actually get people on board, get them excited, and actually solve real problems in the organization and provide real efficiencies. I think that's extremely important. And then to Ed's point, you have to build on that. You can't let that be where you stop. But it's a great starting point because, the more people you can bring on board in an actual grassroots, in a natural way, the more momentum you get behind mission-centered design. And that, once you get people on board, it becomes contagious, right? People want to do that. People want to find ways to fix or solve the problem in a way that actually helps the organization. And, it's not about the shiny new thing you created or the object or whatever it might be. It's how we deliver for our organization and stakeholders in a way that provides real positive outcomes. And I think if you keep that in mind and you make sure you put people in the process that are excited about the process, I think you will always succeed. You will always find a way to succeed. But again, I want to thank everybody online and thanks FedInsider for putting this together. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Ed. It's been a great conversation. Really enjoyed it today.
Thank you so much. And let's turn it over to Claudia Hosky for final thoughts.
Thanks, Bill. And thanks again to all of our speakers today. And for our audience, thank you for your participation. Training certificates will be emailed after the webinar ends. And remember to log back in the next day or two if you want to download a copy of our closed captioning transcript. We have a couple more shows coming up this week and many webinars in the works. So feel free to visit FedInsider.com where you can see what's coming up and register for multiple events at the same time. And while you're there, you can check out our podcast, Feds at the Edge. And with that, this is FedInsider signing off.